Out of Tune Beginnings. Hey guys, tonight I want to tell you something that's been sitting in my chest for years. It's just after midnight right now. And there's this little lamp in the corner of my living room. It casts this amber glow that makes the piano keys look like old ivory, even though they're plastic. I've got a mug of chamomile next to me, steeping a little too long, but I like it bitter. The air's quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen, and the soft tick of the old metronome I still keep on top of the upright. It's not running, it hasn't worked in years, but sometimes I swear I still hear it. Tonight's story isn't about some dramatic explosion. No one cheated, no one vanished. This is just slow erosion, the kind that wears through years without anyone noticing until there's a hole where connection used to be. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing that. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let me take you into the heart of it all. My name's David. I'm 58. I spent most of my life as a high school English teacher through these days. I do some editing from home and drink more coffee than I used to admit. This story's about my dad, Arthur. He was a classical pianist, not famous or anything, but respected enough in his circle, played in a few symphonies, taught students in our garage studio, always kept his nails trimmed for the keys. He loved Chopin, thought Debussy was a little too dreamy. I didn't know what that meant as a kid, but now I think he was describing himself more than the music. Here's what's strange. I don't remember the first time he played for me. Not a specific piece, not even a single note. What I do remember is standing at the doorway to the music room when I was maybe 6, watching his fingers move like they were trying to outrun something. He didn't know I was there. And I remember that if I ever made a sound, the spell would break. He'd stop. He'd close the lid. And that was that. My mom once told me, "Your father only plays when he's alone. That's when it's real for him," which was kind of beautiful, I guess, but also it meant I wasn't part of the real. You'd think, with a father like that, I'd be surrounded by music. But it wasn't like that. Our house was quiet. Too quiet. Sometimes. I'd come home from school and hear nothing. No TV, no records, no humming. Just the tick of that metronome. Like it was holding the place in time he never seemed to have for us. We had a rule growing up. You don't knock on the music room door. If it's closed, that means he's working. Even if it's Saturday. Even if it's your birthday. And sure, he wasn't cruel. He paid for my lessons when I begged to learn. He bought me my first keyboard. But there was a line between us. He was the artist. I was the audience. And audiences don't interrupt the performance. Funny thing, he never actually taught me piano. Never sat beside me. Never corrected my fingers or tapped rhythm into my shoulder like my teacher, Mrs. Patel, did. He'd just nod and say, "Keep practicing." Like that was a magic spell that would one day fix everything. When I was 8, I wrote a little tune. Nothing fancy, just a few chords I liked the sound of. I played it over and over again one night until I got it just right. Then I knocked on the music room door. First and only time. He opened it. I told him I wrote something. He looked at me like I had brought him a fish and expected him to frame it. "That's good," he said. "Now write 10 more. I know now he didn't mean it harshly. No, that was his version of encouragement. But to 8-year-old me, it felt like I'd played my soul. And he'd changed the channel. That night, I went back to my room, turned off the keyboard, and I didn't play for a week. Still, something kept pulling me back. Piano became my way of saying what I couldn't in words. I played when I was happy. I played when I was scared. And I played when I had no idea what I was feeling, but knew I needed to get it out. He kept doing his thing, practicing, performing, recording once in a while. We orbited each other, close enough to hear the music, too far to hear the meaning. Sometimes I wonder if he saw me as competition. Other times, I think he just didn't know how to be both a father and an artist, like he had to pick one. And he chose the one that didn't require talking. There was this one time, I think I was 13. I heard him playing in the middle of the night. I tiptoed down the hall, sat on the floor, and just listened through the crack in the door. It was this wild, aching version of Rachmaninoff. Not perfect, a little frantic, but alive. I remember thinking that's what it sounds like when someone is telling the truth. But when he emerged and saw me sitting there, he frowned. "You should be asleep," he said, and then walked past without waiting for an answer. I went back to bed, but the melody followed me. It still does, sometimes. It sneaks into my fingers when I'm not paying attention. That's the thing about growing up in a house full of music that never really included you. You learn to listen through the walls, and eventually, you start composing in the silence. The empty seat in row 3. The thing about recitals is that you can feel every empty chair, even when the room is packed. Your eyes find the one person who isn't there. And for me, it was always row 3, seat 5. That was where I saved a spot for him, every time. I started performing at little school events when I was around 10. You know, church basements, multi-purpose rooms with those plastic folding chairs that wobble if you shift too much. I'd get all dressed up usually in those itchy sweater vests my mom picked out, and I'd sit backstage pretending I wasn't checking the audience through the curtain slit. But I was, always, and every single time. I hoped he'd surprise me. Just walk in during the opening act, nod like this was no big deal, sit down in row 3 like he belonged there. I imagined that maybe he'd even stand afterward, clap a little louder than the rest, maybe come backstage and say anything about how I'd played. He never came. Oh, he had reasons. Always busy, always a student recital of his own, or a rehearsal. Or, "I didn't know you were playing today, David," which is impressive, considering my mom taped the flyers to the fridge 2 weeks in advance. Once, I saw him take it down to grab a magnet and never put it back. I watched him fold it neatly, like a napkin, and set it beside the toaster. It never made it back to the door. I know. It wasn't malicious, just convenient. What hurts more than absence is how quickly people can make it seem normal. My mom stopped bringing it up. "He has a lot on his plate," she'd say, and I'd just nod. Even though I didn't understand why his plate always had room for strangers and never for me. You learn to fake it, to smile when people say, "Is your dad here?" And you say, "He wanted to be," which is code for no and don't ask again. There was this recital when I was 12. I remember it clearly because I played Claire de Lune, and I'd practiced that thing until my wrists ached. Mrs. Patel, my piano teacher, had this way of humming behind me while I played, like a soft ghost, guiding me through the harder sections. When I finally got it perfect during a lesson, she stopped humming and whispered, "Now that was a story." So I wanted to tell it again, on stage, for him. I even told him the night before. I remember walking into the kitchen, finding him hunched over sheet music, chewing the inside of his cheek like he always did when he was editing. I said, "I'm playing Claire de Lune tomorrow. I think I finally got it." He didn't look up, just nodded. "Debussy," he said, bit indulgent, but sure. I left the room holding my breath, like if I didn't exhale too loud, maybe he'd follow me. He didn't. That recital was the first time I didn't check the audience until after I finished. I sat down, played every note like it was the only note that mattered, and when I hit the last chord, I held it just long enough to imagine it echoing through him, wherever he was. Then I stood, bowed, and looked. Row 3, seat 5 empty. My mom sat in seat 4, clapping with her usual gentle, proud rhythm. She smiled at me, and I smiled back. But I noticed how her hand rested on the chair beside her for a moment, like she had to steady herself. Afterward, she hugged me, told me I was brilliant, that I made her cry. And I remember saying, "He'll hear about it from someone." She didn't say anything, just smoothed my hair, which I hated because it was full of gel. That night, I went into the music room, a sanctuary. It was empty, for once. I sat at the baby grand, turned on the lamp, and played Claire de Lune again, just for the furniture, just for the keys. He came home while I was still finishing the final notes. He stood in the doorway, said nothing. I waited, let the silence stretch. Then he just nodded once and said, "You missed some phrasing in the third passage," and walked away. I stared at the keys for a long time after that, wondering if I should have missed more. Here's the thing. As a kid, you make excuses for your heroes. You convince yourself that love can look like criticism, that presence isn't as important as legacy, that someday, when you're good enough, they'll finally see you. It's like trying to earn sunlight. And the cruel joke is, it's not about you. It never was. But I didn't know that yet. I still believed in performances fixing things. I thought if I played well enough, I'd unlock something in him. Like a door would swing open and he'd step out, blinking, finally noticing I'd been standing there all along. But row 3, seat 5 stayed empty. And slowly, I stopped saving it. The language of keys. By the time I was 13, I didn't talk much. Not because I didn't have things to say, I had plenty, but because I figured no one was really listening. So instead, I started speaking through music. Not like some prodigy or anything dramatic, just quietly, deliberately. The piano became the only place where I didn't second guess every sentence before it left my mouth. You know how some kids scribble in notebooks or slam doors to make a point? I'd sit at the piano and play a variation of Twinkle Twinkle so sarcastically it practically rolled its eyes. Mrs. Patel noticed it first. She once said, "David, you play like someone with something to prove." And she wasn't wrong. At school, I wasn't popular. I wasn't bullied either. I was one of those kids that slips under the radar like background music in a coffee shop. But whenever the school talent show rolled around, suddenly people noticed. Not me, exactly. Just the sound I made. I started composing little pieces of my own. Nothing fancy, just emotional scraps sewn together late at night in my bedroom. I remember this one. I called it Tuesday Rain, because that's when I wrote it. You could hear this one clumsy but hopeful melody fighting its way through a storm of bass notes. I never showed it to anyone, except my cat, Oliver, who seemed generally unimpressed. That was around the time I started fantasizing about being a film composer. I'd sit in dark movie theaters, watching the credits roll, imagining my name sliding past with the words, "Original score by." I could almost hear the music swelling behind it, like the way it does when the camera pans out on some lonely character standing in a parking lot at night. That was basically my aesthetic back then, emotional parking lot energy at home. I kept playing in the living room when I knew he wasn't there, because when he was there, everything changed. The piano turned into something colder, sterile. He'd make comments not mean, just technical. He'd rush the arpeggio, or try using a softer pedal technique. One time, he walked in during a piece I wrote and asked, "Who composed that?" And when I said, "Me," he just went, You know how a single syllable can feel like a shutdown? But here's the thing. I loved music. Not just playing it, but hiding in it. I could feel things there that I didn't have words for yet. Regret, jealousy, hope. That quiet kind of hope that hums under your skin, even when the rest of you feels numb. I played a piece once that I'd written after a really bad day teacher snapping at me. some kid laughing at my shoes, my dad skipping a parent-teacher night without warning. I remember putting every ounce of that frustration into the keys. It was angry and messy and didn't resolve properly, but it was mine. Afterward, my mom poked her head in and said, "That was beautiful, honey. What was that?" And when I told her I made it up, she actually teared up, said, "I felt all of that." I think that was the first time I realized music could communicate what I couldn't. It was like learning a new language, one that didn't require me to be clever or brave, just honest. And, weirdly, I started writing him into the music too. Not on purpose, but he slipped in there, in the dissonant chords that refused to resolve, in the repetitive motifs that felt stuck in place. I even had one piece where the left hand just played the same two notes over and over, while the right hand tried to break free. Guess which part was me? I didn't say these things out loud. I didn't have to. The piano did the talking. And yet, part of me still hoped he'd hear it, really hear it, not the notes. The meaning underneath. Like maybe he'd pass by the room one night and stop, tilt his head, and realize, that's my kid, and he's trying to tell me something. But that never happened. Instead, he'd comment on the key signature, or suggest I add a bridge. Once, after a particularly emotional piece, he walked by and said, "You should study counterpoint more." It's funny. People think silence in a house means peace. But our silence had shape and weight. It filled doorways, followed you down hallways. I learned to step around it like furniture. Still, I kept playing, not for him, not even really for me at that point, but because it was the only place I didn't feel invisible. Funny, right? The one place I felt seen was when no one was watching. The recital that never was the spring. I turned 16. Our school music department hosted its first solo recital night. It wasn't mandatory. But Ms. Adler, our new band director with the thick framed glasses and a kind smile that always felt a little too patient, encouraged me to sign up. "David," she said one afternoon while I was packing up sheet music, "you don't have to share your heart with the whole world. Just let it echo through a room for once." It was the first time someone had described my playing as something that could be shared, instead of critiqued, studied, or filed away in a drawer labeled potential. So I signed up. I picked a piece I had written the winter before. It didn't have a title yet, just a mood quiet, unresolved, a little desperate. I rehearsed it endlessly, and for once, I didn't care how clean the fingering was. I cared how it felt. The night of the recital, I wore a button-up shirt that still had the crease from the plastic packaging. My mom ironed it that afternoon while humming something off-key. She was beaming full of that warm, watery pride only moms can pull off without it feeling like pressure. "You nervous?" she asked in the car. I shook my head, but my palms had already left little sweat marks on my sheet music. We got there early. I sat backstage, listening to the other students perform flutes and clarinets, a shy girl with a violin that trembled with her, and then a boy who played Clair de Lune so beautifully I wanted to quit immediately. But I stayed. What I didn't see was the empty chair, 3 rows from the front, reserved with a sticky note that just said Dad. Mom had written it in her loopy, hopeful cursive. But that chair, it stayed empty the entire night. I remember playing like I was underwater, detached, like part of me was standing in that empty chair, waving, hoping someone would walk in just before the crescendo. But the door never opened. Not once. I played well. I know I did. Ms. Adler hugged me afterward and whispered, "That was brave, David." My classmates clapped. Mom wiped her eyes. A few people even asked if they could get the sheet music. But the only thing I remember from that night is the sickening pit that opened in my stomach when I saw that empty seat. At dinner afterward, some pizza place with 2 bright lights and sticky booths, I finally asked, "Did he know I was performing?" Mom didn't lie. She never did. I told him. Twice. I nodded. And that was it. I didn't rage. Didn't cry. I just folded that disappointment into the same quiet drawer where I kept all the other ones. Because here's the thing. I don't think he meant to hurt me. That's the part that makes it worse. He didn't intend to miss it. I bet he got caught up in work. Or lost track of time. Or maybe even just forgot. And somehow, that stings more than if he'd done it on purpose. At least then, I could have fought back. Instead, I just sat there, 16 years old, eating lukewarm pizza, trying to pretend I wasn't unraveling. That night, I stopped playing for a while. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly. The way a light fades when the bulb is dying. I'd sit at the bench and just not open the lid. I'd tell myself I was tired, or busy, or that it didn't matter. But it did. The music didn't feel safe anymore. It felt exposed. Like every time I hit a note, I was calling out to someone who'd already decided not to answer. Mom noticed. Of course she did. She didn't say anything until a week later, when I left my sheet music untouched on the piano for the third day in a row. "You're not broken," she said quietly over breakfast. Tapping the edge of her coffee mug, "You just need to rest?" I nodded, but I didn't believe her. What I believed was that if my own dad couldn't show up, then maybe I was playing into a void. Maybe my music was just noise no one needed. Maybe I was asking to be seen when I should have just stayed invisible. So I stopped composing, just like that. Not out of spite, not even grief, just resignation. Because some silences aren't peaceful. Some silence is just the loudest no you'll ever hear. Dad's apology and everything. It wasn't 2 weeks after the recital. I came home to a note taped to the fridge. You'd think that would be a strange place to stage an apology. But in our house, the fridge was a billboard. It held dentist appointment reminders, coupons for cereal no one liked, and the occasional passive-aggressive, "Please replace the milk if you finish it in my mother's tidy script." So maybe that's why he thought it would work. The note was written in blue ink, blocky and rushed, on the back of an old grocery list. "David, sorry I missed your performance. I heard it went really well. Let's grab burgers this weekend. My treat. Kitai, Dad. No, I'm proud of you." No mention of the song. Not even a hint that he knew what he'd actually missed. It read more like a rain check for a lunch date with a coworker than something from a man who had just skipped the most important night of his son's young life. Still, I peeled it off the fridge and tucked it into a shoebox where I kept other almost moments. The Christmas card he scribbled on when he forgot to mail one. The baseball game ticket from when he left at the 7th inning because he couldn't reschedule that call. The piece of notebook paper where he'd once written nice solo. Kid after a middle school concert. They were all there. Evidence. Little relics of a father trying but never quite reaching. And I know what some people might say, at least he was trying. But the thing about effort is, sometimes it still leaves you lonely. We did go for burgers that weekend. He picked me up in his pickup truck, still dusty from job sites. The faint smell of drywall and coffee grounds lingering in the cab. I remember the radio was playing some classic rock song, and he tapped the wheel to the beat like everything was normal. He asked how school was. I gave one-word answers. He asked if I was still playing, and I shrugged. He didn't press. Instead, over a plate of fries and a soda that was mostly ice, he told me about a client who was being a nightmare, how he might need to work weekends for the next few months. He laughed at his own stories. I smiled in the way you do when you're trying not to make a scene in public. Then, somewhere between our second ketchup packet and the bill arriving, he looked at me and said, "I'm proud of you." You know, I wanted to believe it. I really did. But all I could think about was that chair, the empty one, reserved with a note that had been too hopeful, the spotlight I had stood under alone, the silence that followed my final note. which somehow sounded louder than the applause. I nodded and said thanks. And I think that was the first time I realized how practiced I'd become at playing along. Playing the good son, the polite one, the one who didn't make it awkward or hard. On the drive home, I watched the trees blur past the window. I counted power lines, anything to avoid looking over at him. He dropped me off and ruffled my hair like I was still 10. Then he said, "We'll catch the next one. Promise." But there was no next one. I didn't tell him I stopped playing. I didn't tell him that every time I sat at the piano. It felt like dialing a number that only rang and rang. What I wanted, what I needed, was for him to sit beside me. Even once. To listen without distraction. To hear me not just as background noise, but as someone calling out. He never did. And the truth, I started to carry. The quiet one, I didn't say out loud until years later. Was this? I think he loved me the only way he knew how, but it wasn't a way I could feel. And that's where the real ache lived. Not in the recital, not in the note, not even in the forgotten burgers or the stories about clients I didn't care about. The ache lived in knowing that I was always reaching, and he was always just a little too far away. The long years without music, after that lunch, the piano stayed closed for a long, long time. I didn't make a show of quitting. I just stopped. No announcement, no dramatic farewell. One day, I simply didn't lift the cover. The bench sat empty. The metronome collected dust. And the sheet music curled at the corners like paper mourning its own silence. You ever have a silence that gets so loud you start to hear it in your bones? That was me at 15. I filled the time with other things. Things that didn't ask much of me. Video games, mindless TV, pretending to be too cool for everything, while secretly envying the kids who still had something they cared about. I remember passing the music room at school one day and hearing someone butcher Claire de Lune. The notes stumble, unsure of themselves. But God, something about the vulnerability of it, the trying. I felt this lump rise in my throat like grief and hope had a fistfight. I kept walking. That became a pattern. I walked past a lot of things. Walked past opportunities to play again. Walked past friends who asked about it. Walked past the old upright in our living room like it was just a piece of furniture and not a reminder of everything I couldn't say out loud. My mom never pushed. She was the kind of quiet that understood another quiet, but every so often, she'd dust the piano keys, gently, like maybe she was keeping them ready, just in case. And I guess deep down, I wanted someone to make me play again, to demand it, to fight for it. But no one did. The closest anyone came was Mr. Baker, my old music teacher. He cornered me by the vending machine one afternoon and said, "Haven't seen you in the practice rooms lately." "Everything okay?" I lied. Told him sports were taking up too much time, which was funny because I ran like a confused flamingo. He didn't push, just nodded and said, "Well, the music's still here if you ever want it." I said thanks and walked off with a stale bag of pretzels and a gut full of guilt. What I didn't understand then, and maybe still struggle with now, is how easily we abandon parts of ourselves when we feel unseen. Like if nobody claps. Did it even matter that you played? I started to believe my talent had been imaginary. That maybe I wasn't all that good. That maybe what I thought was connection between me and Dad, between me and music, had just been wishful thinking with a soundtrack. And when you start dismantling your identity like that, brick by brick, it doesn't collapse loudly. It just quietly disappears. Senior year. I skipped prom and spent the night watching YouTube piano tutorials I never followed. I even tuned the old upright once, thinking I might play something again. But when I sat down, the keys felt foreign, like someone else's story. There were times I dreamed about it, though I'd be on stage again, my fingers gliding like they used to. And just before the final chord, I'd look up and see him in the audience. He'd be clapping, always clapping. And I'd wake up angry at myself for still needing that image. Here's the thing. No one tells you about quitting something you love. It doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like wearing shoes a size too small for the rest of your life. I didn't play again until I was 38. And even then, it wasn't for me. It was for a woman named Claire. But that's a different story for later. Claire. And the night I played again. Claire came into my life the way spring tiptoes into a gray February quiet, unassuming. And then suddenly, you realize everything feels lighter. We met at a bookstore. I know, like something out of a rom-com where nobody checks their phone. She was holding a worn copy of The Bell Jar and making this scrunched up face like the book had just personally offended her. I joked that maybe Plath deserved a second chance. And she replied, "Oh, I'm not mad at her. I'm mad at my younger self for thinking she was deep just because she was sad." That was our first laugh, the first of so many. Claire had this way of noticing things, like the tiniest shift in my voice when I talked about my dad, or how I always hesitated near anything musical jukeboxes, concerts, even TV commercials with piano jingles. She never pried, but she watched. And I think that watching is its own kind of love. Sometimes. One night, maybe 6 months into dating, she asked if I'd ever played an instrument. I lied, just said, "Not really." She nodded, didn't push. But the silence after was heavy, like both of us knew something had just been hidden, and neither of us wanted to name it. A few weeks later, we were walking back from dinner and passed a guy playing piano on the sidewalk. It was one of those upright pianos, painted in wild colors, keys chipped. Sound uneven, but he was making something beautiful out of it. I froze. Literally froze. My whole body tensed like I'd seen a ghost. Claire stopped, took my hand gently, and whispered, "Tell me." And I did. I told her everything. About the recitals, the silence, the dust-covered upright at my mom's. About my dad, and the clapping that never came. She didn't interrupt. She just leaned her head on my shoulder as I talked. And when I finished, she said something I'll never forget. "You don't have to be angry at the music just because he didn't hear it that night." She took me to her place, where, because of course, she had an old digital piano her roommate used to plunk out Coldplay songs. It was a little out of tune. The sustain pedal stuck slightly, and it made this low humming sound like it missed being loved. Claire asked me to play just one song, any song. My hands shook. I felt like I was holding a live wire. But I sat down, and I played. Not a full sonata or anything fancy. Just the first few bars of "River Flows in You," something I barely remembered. Something buried so deep it must have clawed its way back out of some dream. My fingers were stiff. The timing was off. Claire closed her eyes and smiled like she was hearing the most beautiful thing in the world. When I finished, she kissed the side of my head and said, "There you are." That night didn't fix everything. It didn't erase years of shame or undo the silence, but it cracked the seal. It let air into a part of me that had been sealed shut for too long. For weeks after, I played every time I was at her place. Slowly, quietly, just scales at first, then little melodies, then full songs. Claire never made it about her. She never clapped like she was trying to compensate. She just listened fully, presently, like the music was part of me, and she wanted all of it. The strangest part, playing again didn't make me miss my dad more. It made me miss me, the boy I'd left behind when I gave up the piano. The kid who used to imagine concerts in his head, who believed his fingers could tell stories even when words failed. And once I remembered him, I started to forgive him. Not my dad, me. Claire never pressured me to reconnect with my father. But one evening, after I played an original piece I'd been noodling with for weeks, she said softly, "You ever think he might regret it?" To I didn't answer. because I didn't know what scared me more, the idea that he did, or that he didn't. The letter I never mailed. There's a drawer in my nightstand that squeaks every time I open it, like it's protesting, being disturbed from its sleep. Tucked in the back, under expired coupons and a few lonely batteries, is a letter, folded once, yellowing slightly at the crease. I wrote it 6 months after that night with Claire. It starts with "Hi, Dad," which already felt dishonest, like I was using a title he hadn't really earned. But I couldn't write "Dear Richard." That felt worse, cold, distant. So I settled for the only greeting that still stirred something soft in me. I poured out 5 pages in one sitting. No edits, no filter. It wasn't elegant, and it wasn't kind, but it was true. I told him about all of it. The recitals, the applause that never came, the way his silence got louder the older I got. How I used to think that if I just played better, longer, harder, maybe then I'd earn it, and how, when I realized it wasn't coming. I stopped altogether. I told him how I kept carrying that weight, even into adulthood, into relationships, into quiet rooms where I could have created something but didn't. Because I thought if he didn't care, no one would. And I told him I hated that I still wanted to send this letter, that I still wanted something from him after all this time. But the hardest part, the part that made me stop writing mid-sentence and just cry, for the first time in years, was this line: "I don't need an apology. I just needed a moment where you saw me." That letter never made it to a mailbox. I folded it, stuck it in that drawer, and let it sleep there like some small, fragile animal I couldn't bear to wake again. Claire knew about it. One morning, she was cleaning the drawer and found it. She didn't read it, bless her, but she asked if I ever planned to send it. I told her no. She asked why. I said, because I'm not writing it for him. I'm writing it for the boy who needed to say it. She hugged me, tight and wordless. Then she said, sometimes writing it is the answer. And she was right. That letter never had to leave the drawer to do its job. Just putting it down made something shift in me, like I'd finally given that quiet version of myself a voice, like I'd cracked the seal on a basement window that had been shut since I was 11. Still, sometimes I'd wonder, did he ever think about those recitals? Did he remember how I used to wait for his voice, his eyes, some sign that what I'd played mattered? Or was that whole era just background noise to him? I think that's the cruelest thing about estranged relationships. You never really know what the other person carries. You only know your own weight. And it's easy to imagine they walk lighter. One evening, maybe 2 years ago now, I saw him. I was in line at a gas station, holding a protein bar and a sad bottle of iced tea. And I looked up, and there he was. Same stiff shoulders, same shuffle in his walk. The hair was thinner, of course, and his eyes looked tired, not sick, just weathered. He didn't see me. I don't even know if he'd have recognized me. I didn't say anything. I let him walk past, out the door, back into the world that never quite overlapped with mine again. But my heart, it raced like I was that 11-year-old again, holding my breath in a folding chair, waiting for a reaction that never came. And then it passed. The storm inside me settled because I realized I didn't need it anymore. I'd written the letter, I'd played the song. I had people in my life who heard me now. Still, later that night, I went home, opened that drawer, and reread the letter. I didn't cry this time. I just smiled at that younger version of me, the one who needed to scream into the page and whispered, "You're okay. You're okay now." How I made peace with almost you. Ever notice how the word almost can hang in a room like a ghost? Like someone left the door open and a draft of everything that didn't happen just swept through. I used to hate that word. Almost was failure's polite cousin. I almost made it. He almost showed up. We almost got there. But lately, I've started to see almost as a kind of mercy, a softer landing than ever. After rereading that letter, the one I told you about, I started doing something odd. I went to the piano again, not to play full pieces, not for anyone else to hear, just little bits, scales, chords, fragments of songs that used to live in my fingers. The keys were dusty. I had to vacuum the inside because a spider had made a home between middle C and E. Honestly, that felt weirdly fitting, like the universe saying, this place was abandoned. Welcome back. I don't play like I used to. My hands are slower, stiffer. I can't remember all the progressions, but I hum to myself. I make up new melodies, tiny ones I don't write down, and I don't try to make them perfect. I just let them be. The first time Claire heard me, she didn't say a word. She stood in the hallway, backlit by the bathroom light, in that old sleep shirt of hers that says, "World's okayest chef." And I could feel her listening, quiet and still. After I stopped, she said, "You're different now." I said, "You mean older?" She smiled. "No, quieter but fuller." And I knew what she meant. I wasn't chasing the applause anymore. I wasn't trying to prove I could fill a room with sound. I was just trying to make peace with the silence, with what didn't happen, with what almost did. Sometimes healing doesn't look like a grand gesture. Sometimes it's a man playing to an empty living room with a chipped mug of tea on the windowsill, and a cat who has no sense of rhythm purring against his leg. One evening, I played the same 4 chords for nearly 20 minutes, over and over, like I was trying to drill a hole through the past and peek inside. And I realized something I don't need to forgive him. I used to think that was the goal. That peace only came after some great act of forgiveness. But maybe peace is just accepting the weight you carry, not excusing it, not erasing it, just knowing it's yours and walking anyway. The last time my father and I spoke, really spoke, I was 24. It was on a park bench outside a coffee shop. And he asked me if I was still doing that piano thing, like it was a hobby. Like I hadn't spent half my childhood trying to impress a man who didn't know the difference between a sonata and a lullaby. I told him, no, I quit. He just nodded, like I'd said I stopped playing tennis. Then he said, probably for the best. I didn't reply. I just finished my coffee, stood up, and left. I remember my palms were sweating, even though it was cool out, and my throat hurt, like I'd swallowed something sharp. That was the last time. And here's the thing, they say closure is important, but sometimes closure doesn't come with a bow. Sometimes it's just you, standing in your living room decades later, thinking, that wasn't fair, and then making dinner anyway. I still see his face sometimes, though usually when I pass a mirror in the morning, before I've had coffee and my hair's doing its own thing. We have the same brow line, same resting frown, same nose, slightly crooked, but I smile more. Not always, not every day, but more. And I think if I ever were to speak to him again, if that ever became possible, I wouldn't ask him why. Not anymore. I'd just ask him what he remembered. Because I think the scariest thing is wondering if it all mattered only to you. That's the deepest ache of it. But here's where I've landed it mattered to me. And that's enough. Even if he never showed up, even if the applause never came, even if the music faded, I played, I loved, I hoped, I tried. And somehow, that's louder than silence ever was.